All right. So now that we've gone through the Socratic method, we understand that it's about guided discovery. We're understanding what higher order thinking skills are and those types of questions that we're going to use. Now it's coming down to using that method, and it's all about questions. And I find that by categorizing them, it makes it a little bit easier for us as coaches to be able to understand our clients, be able to pull questions a little bit quicker because we're trying to figure out exactly what it is we're asking them or what we're trying to understand. And it can also help our clients because we're not just asking questions that are coming out of the blue and aren't pertinent to them, or they find that these questions are even remotely necessary. So when we ask questions, it's important that there is a reason behind them. And by categorizing them, this might be able to help you. So as you can see, there's 6 different categories of Socratic questions. There's clarifying questions, assumption questions, reasons and evidence questions, viewpoint questions, implication and consequence questions, and questions about an initial question or issue. So we'll go through all of these categories now. And the first one, clarification questions. It's pretty self-explanatory. We just want to clarify something. And it helps us as coach show empathy. So we do want to empathize with our clients. We do want to show that we're trying to understand them and really building that therapeutic alliance. It also helps us check our clients' understanding and seeing if we're on the same page. And it helps us gain more information to help us understand our clients a little bit more, help us understand them in context to be able to reevaluate our blueprint. And we need to clarify things because we say stuff, but is it 100% true, or did we misread what they were saying? Or if it's an email check-in, we know that words written on an email or text can be taken very differently. So oftentimes we just want to clarify. This will also help our clients because we're going to make them think more about what they're maybe asking us or just what they're thinking about. And it'll help them prove the concepts behind their arguments that, is it 100% true? And we want to clarify. And literally, it's going to make them dig deeper than that, just that surface level thought that they popped up and may have said. And you'd be surprised that if we're asking them a clarification saying, what exactly did you mean by that? They might go into bigger detail, and the first initial thought, what they said, wasn't exactly true. So some other example questions that you can use for this are, like I stated, what exactly did you mean by that? So they'll go into greater detail. Another way is to give the statement. So you're going to repeat it back. So for example, on here, yeah, you're feeling mad because your boyfriend didn't go to the gym with you. Now, is that correct? And they'll be able to play on that and explain a little bit more. Simple one is, can you give me an example? So they'll have a statement and they might say, oh, you know what? I'm always just feeling fat, like when I go out. Can you give me an example? And they might go into greater detail, for example, that, when they go out, they're with all their fitness friends, right? So we need context behind this. And another one is, can you tell me more about why you came to that conclusion? Like, let's talk about it. And they'll, again, go into greater detail rather than just a surface level thought. We want to ask questions. The second category is assumption questions. And this helps us as coaches examine or clarify clients' unquestioned beliefs or assumptions, right? So they've gone unanswered and they just believe something or assume something without us really getting into an analysis and understanding that on a deeper level. And this helps clients bring more awareness to those assumptions so that we can actually start analyzing them. But if we don't ask questions on those assumptions, we'll never get to that conscious level of thinking to actually start to look at the evidence behind that or why they might be thinking that way. So some example questions that you can use for your clients. Number one, what else could we assume in that situation, right? Another one, what would happen if, right? So you're adding a little statement. What happened if you had your meal pre-decided before you went to the restaurant, right? What are some of the other assumptions or beliefs that are just as valid? So we want to look at other assumptions, other beliefs that they may not have thought of, but they could be valid. We're not saying they are, but could, right? And another one is, do I understand correctly? And then finish that sentence that you just heard. So you're giving feedback. You're hearing what they've said and you're reinstating that to them and asking if you heard correctly so that they can hear that themselves and then elaborate more. The third type of category when it comes to Socratic questioning is reasons and evidence-based questions. Now, this helps both the coach and the client, and it really helps us reflect and explain the reasons for those feelings that they have, their beliefs and their behaviors. And it will really help you challenge those core beliefs that are just going unanswered. And evidence questions are great because we have these underlying assumptions, maybe about our food, our training, or just our life in general, the way that we see ourselves, and we just take them as simple truths. And you'll learn later on about the cognitive distortions and biases we have. And the greatest thing is to ask is, okay, let's look at the reason behind this, or let's look at the evidence on both sides, right? So we want to look at, what is the evidence is there to support this belief? And by that, sometimes like, ooh, there's nothing that supports that says that, for example, I'm fat because, their stats show that their BMI is healthy, their weight's healthy, their health report's healthy, right? But there are times that they feel a certain way and there is evidence to support it. And you'll learn later that that's important, that we don't just shut down a belief just because, we can see another point of view. There's also a grain of truth to a lot of things that we think, and we want to show support to that, and that helps build a therapeutic alliance. We sometimes want to ask, what led you to that belief? That's going to help start to challenge that core belief that's a little bit deeper, starting to get those questions out. Why do you think that this is true? That again will start to activate that core belief rather than the surface level thinking. And we're going to get down into some possible situations they've had to deal with in the past. This is when sometimes the past is going to come up, but it's very helpful when it comes to trying to look for evidence. And what would be an example? Let's give me an example of why you feel that way. And if you were a judge, would you admit this kind of evidence? That's a great one because sometimes they think of something, they believe it, but there is absolutely no evidence to prove that. And then when you take them out of that question and put them into courtroom, a lot of them love that question. They kind of giggle and said, oh, I wouldn't do too well in court. The other category is viewpoint questions. Now, a lot of us that train clients in health and fitness transformation, we have one sole viewpoint when it comes to maybe a diet, when it comes to a training methodology, when it comes to, I have to do cardio 5 times a week. We have these rules and viewpoints on things, and they're very sticky. They become habits and they're hard to break. So what we want to do is help our clients see other points of view, see other perspectives, and asking viewpoint questions can help on both dynamics from just the coach's perspective and client, because we want to hear their perspective too, because we have one way of thinking maybe as well. So we want that open feedback. So some example questions would be, what might be another way to look at that situation, right? Does that fact that you didn't win your competition really mean that you're unfit, right? So that could just be a perspective, but in general terms, someone that competes is very fit in day-to-day life, right? So we want to get some context and some different viewpoints. A great way to do that is the best friend technique. So you say, how might your best friend look at this situation? Usually we can be very nice to our friends and look at different viewpoints and console them. But when it comes to ourselves, we're pretty mean. We're like bullies. So using that can help. And what's an alternative? Another category is implication and consequence questions. So obviously when we believe something, there sometimes can be a consequence. And by holding on to that belief, we want to know what consequences could happen. And, how is that helping their beliefs and behaviors, or is it not at all? And what are the consequences of that by not noticing, right? So some example questions of that might be, what are the consequences of that assumption? What are the consequences of you assuming that you're overweight or your husband doesn't find you attractive, right? What about this alternative assumption? And then you're just going to go on the complete opposite, read what their body language saying, and really go into that a little bit more detail. I would use that one a little bit later on if it's a touchy subject. Could that really happen or possibly happen? right? So are they doing a worst case scenario, going catastrophizing and going straight there? Or could that possibly happen, but it's very unlikely? This is when we would go into the best case, worst case scenario game. But that probing question right there, could that really happen or probably happen, is a great starting point to segue into that exercise, which you're going to learn later on. And another example question is, if that happened, what else would happen as a result and why? And that one can really start to look at core beliefs or fears, because they're going to state what they fear most. And you're going to ask why they fear that most. And then you can really start to look at your blueprint and see if we need to add something else to the programming to help them. And the last one is questions about initial question or issue. This one is just, you're literally turning the original question on itself. And it brings a lot of clarity, and it really does help us start to identify potential rules for living or core beliefs. And usually, what sometimes a client might state is completely opposite to what they believe, and just throwing back the question can help. So, what did you mean by that? Right? And what does this mean? And they'll usually go into a little bit detail, and you can use the downward arrow technique as well if it's not working, which we'll cover next module. Another example question is, why do you think I asked that question? You know, they'll come up with some good things. Usually, if you've got a good alliance and they know you quite well, they can answer that. And where did you get that idea? So that question really does start to target core beliefs and, where that all began. So we can start again to look at their blueprint, maybe create their tree, right, of where things began in their fitness journey. And then we can start looking at, okay, how are we going to change things? So these questions, as you can see, are monumental when it comes to our coaching practice, but understanding the categories and understanding what types of questions to ask and why would we be asking them. So you're going to get an entire resource and a huge list of questions, but I wanted to go over the different categories so you're aware of why we would be asking certain questions and when, and can really help build, again, your therapeutic alliance, which means that your clients are going to get the results.